In this video, we're going to look at the graphs of tangent, secant, cosecant, and cotangent, or the reciprocal functions. So we want to be able to graph these functions on our calculator, be able to give the properties, domain, range, etc., and we want to be able to match these graphs with equations without using your calculator. So remember that your cosecant function is the reciprocal of sine. So if we kind of connect these points together here, you can see that you get a sine curve. So for me, when I'm thinking about the graphs and I'm trying to do like a multiple choice or a matching question with these reciprocal functions, I will connect them together to decide if this is originally a sine graph or a cosine graph, and then know the reciprocal definitions. So once I see this connecting here, sort of going through the origin, then I know that's 1 over sine, and so I know that's cosecant. So my domain is going to be all real numbers except where my asymptotes are, and they're at multiples of pi. So all real numbers except multiples of pi. Our range, the graph's going down forever, and then it comes up here to -1, and then it starts here at +1 and goes up forever. So my range is -infinity to -1, and then 1 to +infinity. Your asymptotes, remember, are at those multiples of pi. And then zeros are my x-intercepts, remember, and this graph does not have any. So again, secant, remember, is 1 over cosine. So when I see these graphs like this, remember, we're going to connect the dots together here. And then you can see this is at the maximum point on the y-axis, so you know that's cosine, so 1 over cosine is secant. So my domain here is all real numbers except where my asymptotes are, and those are at pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, negative pi over 2. So all real numbers except odd multiples of pi over 2. My range is the same as it was for cosecant, so -infinity to -1, and then +1 to infinity. So the asymptotes are at those odd multiples of pi over 2. And again, this graph has no zeros because it does not cross the x-axis. All right, so next is my tangent graph. So tangent and cotangent look very similar. So two things for me that help me remember the difference between tangent and cotangent. Tangent goes to the origin. Cotangent does not. It has an asymptote on the y-axis. And tangent is always increasing from left to right, where cotangent is decreasing from left to right. So here my domain, again, all real numbers except where those asymptotes are. So here the asymptotes are at those odd pi over 2s. So odd multiples of pi over 2. The range is all real numbers because it goes down forever and up forever. The asymptotes, again, are at those odd multiples of pi over 2. Notice on all of them that the exception in your domain is the same as your asymptotes, so that is a property. And then here my zeros are all these x-intercepts, -2 pi, -pi, 0, 1 pi, 2 pi. So my zeros here are at multiples of pi. And then finally cotangent, remember cotangent is decreasing. So your properties here are similar. So my domain is all real numbers except where the asymptotes are, and notice those are at the multiples of pi again, so except multiples of pi. My range is all real numbers. The asymptotes are at the multiples of pi. And then the zeros are at the pi over 2s now, so -3 pi over 2, -1 pi over 2, 1 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. So my zeros now are going to be at the odd multiples of pi over 2. Okay, so if you're going to graph on your calculator, remember to check your mode. Unless otherwise stated, I would always graph in radians. When you're using secant, cosecant, cotangent, remember you need to use your definition. So for secant, you're going to use 1 over cosine. For cosecant, use 1 over sine. For cotangent, you can use 1 over tangent, although I would recommend instead of using that, I would use cosine over sine. Just because you'll get some, if you use 1 over tangent, you get more undefined values than the graph actually has. And then remember, once you type that in and you're ready to look at your graph, I would use the zoom trig. It just gives you a better window to look at your graph. For the most part, your window is negative pi over 2 to pi over 2 if you're in radian mode. On the newer calculators, it goes a little bit past the negative pi over 2 and pi over 2.